The sound of shattering glass is the only thing louder than my own heart, which thrashes like a dying bird against my ribs. I don't look at the shards on the stone floor. I only look at the mirror. In the flickering candlelight, my reflection is a lie. I grab a handful of the toxic, slate-gray dull dust and rub it into the crook of my neck, gasping as the chemical heat sears my skin to mask the sweet, unmistakable scent of an omega. 3 days ago, my sister Valentina, the pride of the Wraithfall pack, was lowered into a grave in a casket lined with gold. 3 days ago, my father's fingers bruised my throat as he hissed that the world must never know the shield has fallen. "You have her eyes," he'd sneered, shoving me toward her shimmering silver armor. "You will be her reflection, Cordelia, or you will be her shadow in the dirt." Now, the heavy steel plates chafe against my skin, a warrior's shell for a librarian's soul, and every breath I take is laced with the slow poison keeping my identity a secret. I step toward the great hall where thousands wait for a ghost to lead them, knowing this masquerade might be the last thing I ever do. We've spent dozens of hours crafting this emotional journey for you, and if Cordelia's story touches you, your support through a subscription helps us keep these deep-dive narratives alive. The obsidian spires rose from the earth like the jagged teeth of a buried god, slick with the morning's frost and ancient, treacherous moss. To any other wolf, this was a playground of instinct and muscle, a vertical sprint designed to test the explosive power of a future Luna. But as I stood at the base of the first spire, the silver-plated boots of my sister felt like lead weights. The dull dust was a low fire in my throat, a chemical haze that dulled my wolf senses until the world felt muffled, as if I were moving underwater. High above, on the observation dais, High Alpha Percival Arncrest sat like a statue of judgment, his golden eyes narrowed. He wasn't looking for a daughter, he was looking for a weapon. "Begin," the herald's voice boomed. I didn't launch upward with the predatory grace Valentina was famous for. I couldn't. Instead, I hesitated for a split second, my eyes scanning the jagged rock faces not for grips, but for the swaying of the mountain pines nearby. I had spent my life in the library, studying the thermal drafts that rolled off the Wraithfall peaks and the way the granite eroded under northern winds. I knew where the stone was hollow and where the air would push back. I began to climb, my movements stiff and calculated. While the other candidates relied on raw strength to leap the gaps, I moved like a mountain goat, finding the narrowest shelves and utilizing the updrafts to steady my balance. Halfway up the third spire, my heart stuttered. The poison was peaking. A sharp, metallic heat flared in my chest, and for a moment, the world tilted. My foot slipped, and the crowd below let out a collective, sharp intake of breath. I gripped the ledge until my knuckles turned white, the rough stone biting into my palms through Valentina's leather gloves. "Think, Cordelia. Don't be a warrior. Be a scholar." I felt the cold pressure of a crosswind hitting the spire's eastern face, a draft that would blow a heavier wolf off the edge. I leaned into it, letting the pressure pin me against the rock, using the very force that should have killed me to hold me steady while I found my footing. When I finally crested the summit and struck the copper gong, the sound echoed through the valley, but the triumph felt like ash. I descended the back path, my legs trembling so violently I nearly collapsed. As soon as I reached the dirt at the base of the spires, away from the immediate gaze of the council, I doubled over. The cough started deep in my lungs, a ragged, wet sound. When I pulled my hand away from my mouth, the phlegm was streaked with a shimmering, iridescent silver. The dull dust was beginning to crystallize in my blood. From the shadow of a nearby stone pillar, I felt a weight on my skin, a gaze far more piercing than the High Alpha's. Zephyr Nightstalker, the Alpha of the North, stood with his arms crossed over a chest that seemed to hold back a storm. He didn't cheer with the others. He didn't even look at the scoreboard. His dark, intelligent eyes were fixed on my wrists, where the heavy silver gauntlets had shifted to reveal the dark, finger-shaped bruises left by my father. Zephyr's nostrils flared, his head tilting slightly. He wasn't smelling the pine-scented perfume Augustus had doused me in. He was catching the acrid, ozone bite of the suppressant. To a wolf whose pack prided itself on the purity of the bond, I didn't smell like a Luna. I smelled like a crime scene. The transition to the stables was a blur of nausea and fear. I needed water, but before I could reach the trough, a shadow loomed over me, blocking the sunlight. Augustus gripped my shoulder, his fingers finding the exact bruises Zephyr had just been staring at. He shoved me into the dark of an empty stall, the scent of hay and horse sweat normally a comfort, now a cage. "You stumbled," he hissed, his voice a low, vibrating growl of an alpha on the edge of a shift. Valentina never stumbled. "You looked like a limping pup out there, Cordelia." I can't breathe, father," I gasped, clutching my chest. "The dust is too much. My heart is racing." Jasper said. "Jasper is a servant, and you're a disappointment," he snapped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 glass vials, filled with a concentrated, darker version of the gray powder. He didn't offer me a choice. He pinned my head against the wooden slats and forced the powder into my mouth, holding my jaw shut until I was forced to swallow the bitter, burning grit. The reaction was instantaneous. My vision flared white, and a scream died in my scorched throat. Augustus leaned in, his eyes cold and void of any fatherly mercy. "The final trial is the trial of truth. If you falter, if you let even a hint of your pathetic omega scent leak out, I won't just let the council punish you. I will tell the pack that you were jealous of Valentina. I will tell them you poisoned her stimulants to steal her life. I'll make sure your death is much slower than hers." He left me there, shivering in the straw, a hollow shell of a girl wearing a dead hero's armor. I lay in the dark, feeling the new dose of poison racing through my veins, wondering if the moon would even recognize me tonight. Do you think a father's ambition can ever justify this kind of cruelty, or is Augustus beyond redemption? Let me know in the comments. The moon hung low and swollen over the Wraithfall peaks, cast in a sickly shade of amber that matched the fire in my lungs. I sat on the edge of the stone bed in the room that was no longer mine, the silver armor of my dead sister discarded on the floor like the molted skin of a predator. Every inch of my body throbbed with the rhythm of the dull dust, a chemical heartbeat that was slowly drowning out my own. A shadow flickered near the balcony. I reached for a dagger, but the scent hit me first, herbs, sterile resin, and a deep, underlying sorrow. Jasper Moonshadow slipped inside, his face pale beneath the moonlight. As the pack's healer, he was the only one allowed to move freely during the trial nights, yet the way he checked the corridor suggested he was risking his life to be here. "You have to stop, Cordelia," he whispered, his voice cracking. He didn't come to check my vitals, he came to deliver a eulogy. "The dull dust. It's not just suppressing your scent anymore. It's crystallizing in your respiratory tract. If you take another dose for the final trial, you won't survive the night." "I don't have a choice, Jasper," I rasped, my voice sounding like grinding stones. "My father, he'll kill me himself if I don't walk into that circle tomorrow." Jasper stepped closer, his eyes shimmering with a dangerous, forbidden truth. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a crumpled medical parchment, the secret autopsy of Valentina Bloodstone. "You think you're failing her memory? You think she was the perfect warrior Augustus says she was? Look at this." I scanned the notes. My eyes widened as I read the chemical analysis of Valentina's blood. It wasn't just adrenaline. It was a cocktail of illegal stimulants, heart stressors, and synthetic alpha pheromones. "She didn't die of a natural heart failure," Jasper said, his voice a jagged edge of grief. "Augustus was feeding her hypervigor for months. He pushed her heart to 300 beats per minute just so she could break records during the training sessions. He didn't love her, Cordelia. He was using her as a trophy until the trophy broke. Valentina wasn't your rival. She was the first victim." The realization hit me harder than any of Augustus's blows. The sister I had envied, the sister I had been forced to mimic, had been living in a different kind of hell, a golden cage of performance and poison. I wasn't just a replacement. I was the second attempt at a failed experiment. The morning of the final trial arrived with a cold, biting wind. The great arena was a sea of fur and bared teeth. At the center lay the circle of truth fire, a ring of ancient, blue-flamed naphtha that reacted to the pheromones of deceit. It was the ultimate test. A Luna could not lead if she could not be honest. High Alpha Percival Arncrest stood at the head of the council, his presence a mountain of immovable tradition. "Candidates, step into the flame," he commanded. "The fire will recognize the blood of the righteous. It will consume the soul of the liar." I watched the other 3 candidates step forward. The flames remained a calm, steady blue. Then it was my turn. I stood at the edge of the flickering heat. If I stepped inside and claimed to be Valentina Bloodstone, daughter of Augustus, the flames would turn into a white-hot inferno. The dull dust masked my scent, but it couldn't mask the truth of my soul. I looked up at the dais. Augustus was leaning forward, his eyes boring into me, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He was waiting for me to lie and survive, or lie and burn. Either way, he would have his victory. But I was no longer the girl in the library. I was the sister of a murdered girl and the daughter of a monster. In a move that shattered the silence of the arena, I didn't step into the circle. Instead, I reached into the hidden pouch at my waist and pulled out the large leather bag of dull dust, the entire week's supply of the poison. "You want a Luna of truth?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the stone tiers. I looked directly at Augustus, seeing the first flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. "Then let the truth be seen." I tore the bag open and tipped it back, swallowing the toxic gray powder in a single, suicidal gulp. The world turned into a roar of white noise. The chemical reaction was violent and instantaneous. The dull dust, meant to be applied topically or in microdoses, hit my system like a lightning strike. I felt my veins turn to ice, then fire. I collapsed to my knees at the very edge of the blue flames, gasping for air that wouldn't come. As my body began to shut down, the suppression failed. The gray haze that had clouded my aura for 18 years evaporated in a single, brilliant burst. A scent of clove, cedar, and ancient, powerful omega earth exploded from me, so potent that the wolves in the front rows fell back in shock. Beneath the dying gray dust on my shoulder, my birthmark, the mark of the crescent omega, glowed with a blinding, ethereal light. An omega? High Alpha Percival stood, his voice a thunderclap of disbelief. "A bloodstone omega?" Augustus roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. His deception was dead. His mask was shattered. He leaped from the dais, his claws extended, shifting midair into a massive, blood-red wolf. "Disgrace," he howled. "You are no daughter of mine. I will purge this filth from the earth." He lunged for my throat as I lay paralyzed, my heart failing. But he never reached me. A blur of black fur and shadow intercepted him midair. Zephyr Nightstalker, the rival Alpha, didn't just intervene. He slammed into Augustus with the force of a falling star. The 2 Alphas tumbled into the dirt, a chaotic storm of teeth and fur. Zephyr stood over my trembling body, his eyes glowing a predatory, protective green. He shifted back to his human form, his chest heaving, and looked up at the High Council. "Stop." Zephyr's voice carried the authority of the North. Augustus tried to rise, but Zephyr pinned him with a single, heavy boot to the chest. "By the laws of the first moon, I invoke the right of life debt. This female has been poisoned by her own blood. Her Alpha sought her death in the sacred arena. I claim her as my ward. I claim her as my life debt. She is a traitor." Augustus screamed, spitting blood. "She is Wraithfall property." "She is a corpse if she stays here," Zephyr countered, his voice cold as the Arctic. He knelt beside me, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he scooped me into his arms. He shared a spark of his alpha energy through the touch, a jolt of pure life that restarted my stuttering heart. And the High Council knows that a life debt claim supersedes pack law when a father's hand is at his daughter's throat. High Alpha Percival looked at the glowing Omega mark on my shoulder, then at the shattered vials of poison on the floor. He inclined his head slowly. The claim is valid. Take her, Night Stalker. She is no longer of Wraithfall. The last thing I heard as Zephyr turned and carried me away was the collective, unified howl of the Wraithfall pack, a sound of confusion, mourning, and the first cracks of a revolution. I leaned my head against Zephyr's chest, the rhythm of a true alpha's heart lulling me into the first safe sleep I had ever known. I'm so glad you stayed for this turning point in Cordelia's journey. If you're ready to see how she transforms from a victim into a queen, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next chapter. I woke to the smell of cedar and rain. It was a sharp, grounding scent that didn't burn my throat or cloud my mind. For the first time in 18 years, the constant, low-grade fever of the dull dust had broken. My skin felt cool, my breathing rhythmic and deep. I opened my eyes to find myself in a room that felt more like a forest than a cell. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating vases of wildflowers and shelves packed with leather-bound books. There were no stone walls here, no damp shadows of the Wraithfall dungeons. I sat up, expecting the usual wave of nausea, but it never came. Instead, I realized the room was filled with a rich, heavy fragrance, my own. Without the poison, my Omega scent had finally bloomed, a deep aroma of clove and ancient earth that announced my presence without shame. It suits you, a voice said from the balcony. Zephyr stood there, silhouetted by the morning sun. He had traded his heavy battle furs for a simple black tunic, looking less like a marauder and more like a man at peace. He walked toward the bed, stopping just far enough away to respect my space. The healers worked through the night, he said, his voice a low rumble. They had to purge the crystallization from your lungs. Another hour in that arena and the damage would have been permanent. Why did you do it? I asked, my voice finally clear, stripped of its jagged rasp. You risked a war with the High Council for a girl you barely know. You could have had Valentina. You could have had the shield of Wraithfall. Zephyr let out a soft, huffing laugh. I didn't want the shield, Cordelia. I wanted the shadow. He sat in a chair across from me, his green eyes searching mine. 10 years ago, when our packs were still at peace, I attended a summit at your father's estate. While everyone was outside watching Valentina break training dummies, I got lost in the north wing. I found a girl hiding behind a tapestry, reading a forbidden history of the first moon. She was so engrossed in the text, she didn't even notice a future alpha standing over her. My heart skipped. I remember that day. I thought I'd imagined the boy who didn't tell on me. I've watched you at every summit since, Zephyr admitted, his expression softening into something raw and vulnerable. I watched Augustus treat you like a ghost while he polished his golden trophy. I saw the way you managed the ledgers, the way you navigated the diplomatic minefields that would have baffled Valentina. I didn't save you because you were an Omega, Cordelia. I saved you because I've been waiting a decade for the world to see what I saw. The weight of his words did what the poison never could. It made my breath hitch with pure emotion. Before I could respond, the heavy oak door creaked open. One of Zephyr's scouts leaned in, his face grim. Alpha, the Wraithfall enforcer, is at the Iron Gate. He's alone, but he's demanding to see the girl. Kratos Bowshatter, my father's most loyal hound. I insisted on meeting him at the border. Zephyr stayed back, a silent, looming shadow of protection, as I walked toward the stone bridge that separated our territories. Kratos stood there in his blackened armor, his massive axe slung over his shoulder. He looked like a man made of scars and bad intentions. Alpha Augustus wants his property back, Cordelia, Kratos growled, though his eyes lacked their usual fire. He looked tired. He says if I don't bring you back, he'll execute my brothers for allowing the Night Stalker to breach the line. I didn't cower. I didn't hide behind Zephyr. Instead, I reached into the bag I'd brought from the library and pulled out the master ledger I had spent years secretively duplicating. I walked right up to the line and thrust the book into his calloused hands. "Look at page 42, Kratos," I said, my voice steady. "And then look at page 80. You've served my father for 20 years. You've bled for him. You've broken bones for him. Do you know where the widow's pensions went last winter? Do you know why your brothers didn't receive their winter rations while my father bought a new fleet of silver-plated carriages?" Kratos frowned, his thick fingers clumsily flipping through the pages. As he read my meticulous notes, the color drained from his weathered face. He saw the numbers, the systematic theft of the Pack's wealth to pay off Augustus's gambling debts to the High Council. He saw the signatures, his own name forged to authorize the disposal of Pack resources. "He's not an alpha, Kratos," I said softly. "He's a parasite. He killed Valentina with stimulants, he tried to kill me with dull dust, and he's been starving your family to keep his secrets. You're not his enforcer. You're his scapegoat." Kratos looked at the ledger, then back toward the distant, dark spires of Wraithfall. The loyalty that had defined his life snapped in a single, silent moment. He closed the book and tucked it under his arm. He didn't look at me as a servant anymore. He looked at me as a leader. "He's mobilizing for war tonight," Kratos said, his voice thick with newfound rage. "He thinks the Night Stalker is the enemy. He doesn't know the enemy is already inside his gates." "What do you want me to do?" "Go back," I commanded. "Tell him I'm dying. Tell him Zephyr is distracted by his grief. And then, when the sun sets, open the back gate for the wolves who actually care about the Pack." Kratos nodded once, a sharp, military gesture, and turned back toward the shadows. I felt Zephyr's hand on my shoulder, his warmth seeping through my cloak. "You're a better strategist than any general I've ever met," he whispered. But as I looked at the dark horizon, I felt the old fear creeping back. Augustus was a cornered animal, and a cornered alpha was the most dangerous creature in the world. If you were Cordelia, would you stay safe in the new Pack where you are loved, or would you risk everything to go back and get justice for your sister? Type stay or justice below. The heavy iron doors of the Wraithfall Great Hall groaned as they swung open, but the woman who stepped through the threshold was not the one they expected. I wasn't clad in silver plating or the heavy, blood-stained leathers of a warrior. I wore the simple, midnight blue robes of a scholar, my hair unbound, falling over my shoulders in waves that smelled of cedar and cloves. For the first time, my Omega mark was visible to every wolf in the room, glowing with a steady, defiant light. To my left stood Zephyr, a mountain of shadow and quiet power. To my right, Kratos, the man who was supposed to be my father's most loyal weapon. The hall fell into a silence so absolute it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Augustus stood at the head of the long table, his face contorting from shock to a mask of murderous fury. High Alpha Percival Ironcrest sat in the center, his golden eyes tracking my every movement as I walked toward the dais. "How dare you?" Augustus snarled, his voice a vibration of low-frequency rage. "You come back here with the enemy? You bring a traitor into my hall." "I don't see an enemy here, Augustus," I said, my voice projecting with a clarity that silenced his growl. "I see a Pack that has been bled dry by its own alpha." I reached into the folds of my robes and pulled out a stack of documents, the ledgers, the stimulants found in Valentina's quarters, and a vial of the gray sludge extracted from my own lungs. I didn't throw them. I placed them carefully before High Alpha Percival. "Valentina didn't die because she was weak," I told the council, my gaze never wavering from Percival's. "She died because her heart was forced to its breaking point by her own father's greed. He fed her hypervigor to win a trial he'd already gambled away. And when she died, he used me. He poisoned my blood with dull dust to hide my scent, all to keep the trade of these very poisons flowing to pay off his debts to the black markets of the South." A low, collective rumble of disbelief rolled through the hall. Percival leafed through the ledgers, his expression hardening with every page. Augustus let out a roar, his skin beginning to ripple as he lost control of his shift. Lies, he screamed, the sound becoming more animal than man. Kratos, kill her. Kill them all. Kratos didn't move. He stood like a stone sentinel, his arms crossed over his chest. Augustus reached out with his mind, trying to trigger the Alpha Link, the mental command that should have forced every Wraithfall wolf to attack. But as the link hit the pack, they didn't surge forward. They stepped back. The bond was broken. You cannot lead those you have betrayed, and the scent of my father's corruption was now more potent than his authority. Your own pack refuses you, Augustus, Percival said, his voice like the tolling of a funeral bell. He stood, his presence filling the room with the weight of ancient law. The evidence of your treachery is absolute. You have murdered your heir and sought to destroy your survivor. Percival raised his staff and struck the stone floor. By the power of the High Council, I strip you of your title, your name, and your lands. You are Alpha no longer. Augustus lunged. He shifted midair, a monstrous, ragged red wolf aimed directly for my throat. But Kratos simply stepped aside, allowing the momentum to carry Augustus past me. Zephyr met him with a single, devastating blow that sent the former Alpha sprawling. Within seconds, the Council's own guards moved in, pinning Augustus down and snapping heavy, magic-dampening chains around his neck and wrists. He wasn't even allowed the dignity of a warrior's end. He was dragged out of the hall, his eyes wild and foaming, destined for the Grey Wastes, a place for those who are neither pack nor rogue, but simply nothing. The transition of power was not a battle, but a surrender. The Wraithfall pack, tired of the blood and the secrets, looked to the north. Months later, the air was crisp as Zephyr, and I stood at the edge of the great waterfall that fed both our lands. The territories had merged, the border stones replaced by a bridge of white oak. The world felt larger, brighter, and infinitely more peaceful. I felt Zephyr's hand slide over mine, his thumb tracing the back of my knuckles before resting on the slight swell of my stomach. He's quiet today, Zephyr whispered, his green eyes reflecting the shimmering water. He knows he's safe, I replied, leaning my head against his shoulder. He'll never know what the dust tastes like. He'll never have to pretend to be anything but exactly who he is. We stood there for a long time, watching the waterfall, a constant, cleansing force. But there was one final thing I had to do. I walked alone to the quiet grove where Valentina had finally been laid to rest. The golden casket was gone, replaced by a simple, elegant slab of granite. I knelt by the headstone and pulled a small vial from my pocket. It didn't contain poison or stimulants. It was pure, clear water from the high mountain springs where we used to hide as children. I poured the water onto the thirsty earth, watching it soak into the soil. The masquerade is over, Val, I whispered, the wind catching the words and carrying them into the pines. I'm not wearing your armor anymore. And you don't have to be a hero anymore. We're both free. I stood up and walked back toward the lights of the castle, where Zephyr was waiting. The shadow had finally stepped into the sun.